So these are the different words used to describe snakes or serpents in the Bible. And these are the Hebrew ones, and these are the Greek translations. But it's interesting to note that in the English Bible, when you see like snake or serpent, you don't exactly know the full specific meaning. And that's the case for a lot of things because English relies way more on context. But I've looked at this before, and like for instance, you have the word seraph, or I think it's supposed to be spelled seraph. I think the AI got it wrong, which means like burning serpent or like fiery one, and it's like you can think of like the seraphim. So it's the same word, and that was the word that was used for the snakes that bit the Israelites when Moses raised up the bronze serpent on the pole, and they looked upon it and they were healed. So it's interesting because if you think of like the commonality between like a seraphim and those snakes is that they represented they were like executors of God's judgment upon sinful people, and like seraphim like punish they would bring like messages of judgment and stuff like that. But I was looking at this one, tannin, which is an interesting word because we have the word tannin still for like wine and stuff. But this one translates more to like serpent, dragon, sea monster, which is really interesting because you hear about sea monsters in the Bible too, like the Leviathan and stuff, and people have all different interpretations for what that is. But my understanding of Leviathan and like the monsters of the deep and the sea has always sort of come down to like it represents, if you think of it from like a physics perspective, it represents basically entropy or pre-creation chaotic formlessness, if that makes sense. The word sea has been used in that way in the Bible a lot, and if you think about the spirit of that word, if you think back to the time of the Israelites, what does the sea represent? It's this big thing that can't be contained, that is sort of formless and unpredictable but powerful, and then things come up out of it, for reasons they don't understand. But if you think of like space with a bunch of random matter floating around and sort of all these sort of crazy physics phenomena and stuff, it even looks like an ocean. But anyways, that's just my theory of it. And then you can think of like seas of people, and a lot of times when the Bible talks about the sea, it also means it's referring to a group of people. And if you think about like a group of people, if you were to like zoom out in Times Square or something, people kind of move like a fluid. So it's interesting. They sort of follow a single path, but then some of them go off to the side, but most of them sort of follow the same path, and it's like this big sea of people, and people are kind of like that. And then of course, Jesus, out of his body came water when he was pierced, right? It was the living water, and Jesus says that if anyone remains in him, rivers of living water flow out of them. So you have a difference. Oh, and then of course Genesis, the separation of the waters from the waters. In other words, going into chaos and formlessness, imposing limitations, and thus creating form and creation out of this sort of infinite potential, limitless, chaotic, everything and nothing at the same time type of thing. And then, in other words, just God, right? Because God is everything, and is everything with a spirit. But we are contained things that have limitations, and thus we are creation, and we are of God, and we are created by God. We are not above God, if that makes sense. We are within God, you could say, I guess. But yeah, so that's all right. All that is to say, I have always been confused as to why and what it meant that God condemned the serpent to crawl on its belly. And of course we have an actual snake, an actual animal, which would probably be this word up here, the actual animal that you see. Even that one's a little interesting because it's like shining one, and the way snakes move and stuff. Even the way a snake moves is sort of warpy and twisty, and it's a little bit like the ocean. But I've always been confused about that. Of course, we have the animal, and when you're a kid and you hear about that, you're like, so that's why snakes are like that? What, did they have legs before? What does that even mean? It's like, that doesn't make any sense that doesn't mean anything. But if you think it from a spiritual perspective, and you start thinking of what a serpent represents, and this is in other mythologies as well, the world serpent, Jormungandr, comes up out of the sea, and he's as large as the world, and he devours everything and destroys everything, and stuff like that. And it's sort of this self-eating thing, the Ouroboros, right? Self-eating, chaotic sort of, that represents the negative, sort of the evil version of this, where things go into entropy and things sort of eat themselves into destruction. But then there's the living water of Christ, which brings life, and it brings growth, and it brings new life. You must be born again. We go down into the water, and we die to our flesh, and we raise a new creation in Christ. And that's the living water. So there's still a destruction that's taking place, but there's a difference between the destruction of the cycle of sort of evil eating itself, and the living water that washes that stuff off of us and actually creates a new thing. Behold, I create a new thing. Think not on former things. I create a new thing. I'm making streams in the desert, and a way in the wilderness, water. Okay, I get to my point now. Keep rambling, but here's the point. I never understood why that was a thing. Why did God condemn the serpent to crawl on its belly? What does that mean? Okay, think about it from this perspective. You have people in society that have an eye for the spiritual, right? And oftentimes, where do they end up? Think about your people who have that chaotic sort of thinking, connecting different ideas that seem seemingly disconnected, but then on their so-called schizophrenic ramblings, every once in a while, these people make sense in a way that you're kind of like, if you ever listen to somebody talk that has been diagnosed with schizophrenia, they say things that make sense, but at the same time, it's like there's a whole mess of chaos living in their head, right? A sea, a churning ocean. Psychonauts, people who take drugs and they start acting in these wavy, flowy, go with the flow, bro. All these weird ocean-related euphemisms. But where do these people end up? These people that are sort of these spiritual delvers, and oftentimes not in a good way, but through evil means, through not that all psychedelics are bad, but oftentimes drugs and stuff like that are used in ways that are abusive, and this is what it does to their brain. It entropizes it. It melts everything together. It takes form and order, and where limitations and separation and categories were, it sort of starts to melt and twist everything together. And that's that evil manifestation. But where do these people end up? They don't end up in authority, right? They don't end up on the top of the hierarchy in society and life. They end up out on the street, screaming at their demons as they go. And I mean, if you ever lived in a city, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And that is not metaphorical. That's literal. But so what we're seeing is that maybe the original design for creation was much more spiritually connected. And we have now gone into a society because of the misleading of the evil version of this river of water of death. Because of that, God stepped in and said, nope, now I'm going to put an authority structure in place. I'm going to put people into ordered categories, and they're going to tell each other what to do. And we all know that sucks and we don't like it, but that's a product of sin. and it's how it is now for the time being. But originally, it was supposed to be that we were more plugged into the spiritual and that we would be guided by the Spirit. But because we allowed a false spirit in, that evil, chaotic energy, that was put second to the order of things being regimented, and ordered, and limited. And now we're seeing that take over. And it's interesting. In Job, they have the Leviathan, which is that sea serpent, but then they have the behemoth, which is this large land-dwelling, crushing animal that just sort of crushes and mows down everything it comes across underneath its feet. And my personal kind of thinking about that is that maybe that's what that is. That's that order spirit that comes by, and it has its own way of being evil. But yeah, it's the yin and yang you see in other spiritualities. Everything sort of comes from one place. So yeah, that's what I think it means that the serpent was condemned to crawl on its belly. That's what I think that means.